Hey, welcome one all to Roger That Chronicles, where veterans talk about issues that are interesting to other veterans. Once again, welcome to our show. And there you go, Mike.
I thought we were going to introduce ourselves first.
Yes, my name is Rick Prescott.
My name is Jason Hurth, the Marine Corps veteran.
And I'm Mike Ruffner, United States Marine Corps, retired.
Jason. More on 2020. Oh, wrong show. Oh, wrong, Roger That Chronicles, not 2020.
Yeah. Anyway, don't forget to check us out on Twitch, Twitter, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And if you're going to view on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, bell notification for future videos for Roger That Chronicles. And also thank you to our producers, 216 The Nets and Tim behind the camera over there.
We are pleased today to introduce our guest speaker who served the United States Navy from 1963 to 1991. That was before you were born there, buddy. But anyway, we are going to talk about a very interesting career of as a naval officer. Please welcome Captain Jack Caruso, United States Naval Reserve.
Welcome aboard, Jack. How are you?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Fantastic.
It's good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. Really appreciate it. You know what? You and I had some conversation the other day and gave us some highlights of your career and everything else. Why don't we start off by finding out a little bit about your background, where you're from, where'd you go to school, that sort of thing.
Well, I was born way back in 1941, just before World War II, in Detroit, Michigan. My early years, I grew up in Detroit, as well as on a farm in northern Michigan near Sheboygan. And I went to grade school in a little town called Northville, which is out west of Detroit. We had all 12 kids in our 8th grade graduation class. So that was a real gigantic school. At least we had 6 boys and 6 girls, so we could dance together. Then from there, I went to a Jesuit high school in Detroit. I was fortunate enough to be able to go there, and 4 years at the University of Detroit High School. And from there, I applied for and was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Marquette University in the Naval ROTC program. And that was sort of the beginning of my naval career. When I showed up at Marquette in Milwaukee in 1959.
Was the beer as good in Milwaukee at that time as it is now?
Yeah, it was pretty darn good. We could get quarter barrels and half barrels down on Wells Street from the beer depot. It was awful good stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Were the barrels still made out of wood at that time? Or
No,
I'm just kidding.
We had moved up to the aluminum ones, and we had the little pump on top.
Well, you had a phenomenal career, it sounds like. You mentioned to me the other day that, within 3 months, you went off on your first mission after getting out of ROTC and being on board a ship. What ship were you on?
The first ship I was on was the first ship I was on for a significant amount of time was the USS Manly, DD 940, which was a Sherman class destroyer. It was well armed. We had 3 5-inch 54 guns along with 2 twin mount 3-inch 50s. So we were basically a gunboat set up for that purpose, as well as to do anti-submarine warfare.
What did you guys do out there? I mean, they sent you out on the high seas. What was your job?
My job? Well, the first thing that happened to me when I graduated in the spring in June of 1959 is I was sent down to Key West, Florida, to the Fleet Sonar School. So I spent a nice summer down there, continuing my leisurely college days. But then all of a sudden, in the end of August, I wound up on board the Manly as the ASW officer. And we were out of Charleston, South Carolina. And it was just within about a month of getting aboard that we headed across the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. And that was our first deployment. We kind of, I'll just kind of tell you a story. We spent probably about a month or so in the Mediterranean, and we along with one other destroyer, chopped through the Suez Canal down into the Mideast. It was kind of startling for me. I mean, all of a sudden, here I had been back in Milwaukee. Then all of a sudden I'm in Key West, and now here I am looking at camels, looking at sand dunes, looking at fellows wearing white thobes and head wrappings. And we stopped after we got through Suez. We stopped in Aden, and we also stopped in Jeddah, and that was Aden down in Yemen, which was at that time undergoing a lot of changes that were occurring in the entire Mideast. The British, with a lot of pressure from the world, were ceasing to maintain colonies in Africa, as well as their presence in the Persian Gulf and the other areas of the Indian Ocean. And it was obvious that they were gone. And here we were, 2 destroyers, U.S. destroyers, a command ship, which was an old converted AVP. I don't know whether it was the Valcour or the Duxbury Bay, located up in Bahrain. And here we were, 2 destroyers covering this entire part of the world for the United States. And we're dealing with thousands of miles. So our job over there was to show the flag, to let all of the folks in our consuls, our embassies know that the United States was somewhere around, that if there was trouble, we could come and help them out. And so I spent a wonderful Christmas up in the Persian Gulf in a sandstorm. That was exciting. Then I spent New Year's Eve retrieving drunk sailors off of a pier in Bahrain. That was another excitement. But from there, we went down, across the equator, and went down to Mombasa, Kenya. And we weren't in Kenya for more than a couple of days when we got word from the embassy that there was a problem down in the island of Zanzibar, which was probably about 60 miles from where we were. This is a big island off the coast of Tanganyika. And
Zanzibar is one of the Spice Islands, is it not?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Right.
And that goes back centuries, its importance in the trading world amongst the Arabic countries of
Right.
the region. And so we received word that we were going to be put directly under the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and we were to go down and rescue approximately 100 Americans from the island of Zanzibar, which these folks had been captured by a coup that had overthrown the newly formed government of Zanzibar.
So just taking a step back here just for a moment,
Sure.
The Zanzibar, I believe, since about the late 1800s, was a protectorate of Great Britain. And it wasn't a colony, but it was a protectorate. And I think it was managed out of another capital city, maybe out of Tanzania or something like that. But they backed away. They because of these changes where the crown was pulling back on its protectorates and colonies, Zanzibar all of a sudden found itself in a situation of a power vacuum. Do I have that right? That's
correct. The British had, I guess we would call it, protectorate and/or colonial status of a large part of that part of the world.
Right.
And,
wow.
They had given independence at that point to both Kenya, Tanzania, which was across a channel from Zanzibar, and Zanzibar had been a trading port for both Arabic folks as well as Indian folks for centuries. And as I recall, and again I'm going back on my memory on this, but there was a fellow by the name of Babu who was the rebel leader that had taken over the government in Zanzibar, and he had taken roughly 100 Americans, including other foreign nationals, and was hanging on to them. I guess, I don't know whether they're going to ask for ransom or what they were going to do with them, but our job was to see if we could go down there and possibly rescue them. So we took aboard a representative from the State Department, as well as a young fellow from Kenya by the name of Gregory. He had never seen the ocean before, let alone a warship, and he was our interpreter to be able to speak Swahili if as necessary on our journey. So we took off like a literal bat out of hell from Mombasa, heading for Zanzibar. We left several of our officers ashore who had been on liberty. They were just left there on their own, and so we headed down there. Took us a day to get there. We pulled in. The first thing that we encountered was a small boat that came over to us from a British survey vessel that was anchored in the harbor of the home port in Zanzibar, and it was the executive officer from that survey vessel that said, if you folks go ashore, could you possibly see where our captain is? He was ashore when the revolt occurred, and we don't know where he is. So we said, great. That really kind of set it up for us that things were really in bad shape when even a British HMS ship had its captain also captured.
Wow.
So the long and the short is the captain and the XO of our ship, and I was just, again, a silly little ensign, asked anybody aboard ship would volunteer to be a ship landing party to go ashore. We would be armed and go ashore. So everybody volunteered. The entire crew volunteered. So then it was decided by the captain and the XO that maybe we should just send the XO ashore along with a small ship's company that is on the whale boat, unarmed, and see what we could do. Well, they went ashore. The XO was Lieutenant Commander Joseph Murray, and he went ashore. And as soon as they got ashore, he was taken with a gun pointed to his head, put into a truck.
American taking custody.
American taking custody. He was taking custody with a gun to his head, and they took him to their revolutionary headquarters. As they approached the headquarters, he saw a dead person being dragged out that they had executed in this headquarters. So they escorted him in. They set him down at a table with various representatives of the Revolutionary Council. As he looked around, he could see that there were a number of Cuban, that he had determined that they were Cuban mercenaries. And so part of the thing was that there were a ton of Cuban mercenaries involved in this revolution, which leads one to suspect that at that time, Russia was supporting Cuba, after Castro had taken charge of it. And part of the payback to Russia was putting mercenaries here and there, and they were there. So we kind of said, the Russians may be involved in this situation. At the same time, the XO also noticed a hazy figure in the background who was obviously an Arabic fellow. And he seemed to be the one that was actually giving the orders about things. Well, the discussions went on for 3 hours. Nothing good was happening out of it. And God bless the XO. He, along around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, he looked down at his watch and he said, in 1 hour from now, he said, if I'm not back on the ship, that ship is going to take its big guns and it's going to level this place. You guys will be gone. Well, the shady figure back by the curtain gave a nod, and at that point, they took the XO back to the ship's landing. They brought all of the civilians that were being kept hostage. They brought them down to from the Old English Club down to the pier. We got our whale boat out. We got our captain's gig out, the only 2 boats we had, and we began transferring the folks off the shore. And we took off the foreign women and children first, especially those where the children were of Indian, were Indian, where the father may have been Indian, the mother may have been whatever, because we ascertained quickly that if you were Indian, you were automatically dead. They were just executing anybody they thought was an Indian. So we got those folks off first. Then we took the American women off. Then we took off the foreign national men. And then we took off American men. We left behind the U.S. ambassador and the U.S. Head of the Mercury tracking station, which the U.S. had established a tracking station for our space program on the island of Zanzibar. So he stayed behind along with the ambassador to protect U.S. interests. So all of a sudden we had a ship full of people. We had all kinds of babies needing diaper changes. We had sailors holding the little babies, feeding them their bottles, bringing the fresh diapers, allowing the mothers to get in and take showers because we only had a limited amount of fresh water that we could make. So we got them cleaned up. The sailors gave up their bunks for these folks, and we fed them. And we took them a short trip across the channel to Dar es Salaam, Tanganyika. Later on, Tanganyika and Zanzibar became one country, but at this time they were separate countries, newly established countries. So we let all of these folks off. There were just under 100 of them, and within about 2 or 3 days, we headed back up to Mombasa to get our officers we'd left behind. Next thing we know, there was a revolution in Dar es Salaam, and as we pulled our officers out of Kenya, they had a revolution in Mombasa. So we wound up
like it's just a beehive throughout that entire region.
A stinking mess. So we wound up sitting out there, and the British brought in 3 aircraft carriers. They brought in ship's landing craft and sent in Royal Marines into Mombasa, into Dar es Salaam, and into Zanzibar to stabilize the business, which they did. And we watched, just steaming back and forth, watching, and they stabilized the situation, and the countries went back, under their rightful governments and maintained their independence. So that was my sort of introduction to having fun at sea.
For the interest of our viewers, during that time, what happened over there? From my little research, was it on the 12th of January, 1964, the Sultan of Zanzibar, Jamshid bin Abdullah, was deposed, and the Zanzibar Revolution took place, and that involved a replacement by a new sultan from the People's Republic of Zanzibar. And of course, as soon as we hear People's Republic of anything, we know that it's Soviet-backed.
Yep.
And a socialist government was established by the Afro-Shirazi Party, the ASP, during that time. And that's who was revolting, that took over that power vacuum. Now, what's kind of interesting is this is during the Cold War, and you guys apparently were the only American ship within 1,000 miles of that area, and patrolling and trying to maintain some sort of balance in the conflicts that were rising throughout that entire region, throughout Africa and the Middle East. Beginning with the British pullout from all of its protectorates and colonization. So the Soviets just took advantage of the situation and put in these little despot type of leaders, and you guys are maintaining the balance of power.
Well, they moved on awfully fast as the British were moving, back west of Suez, and that power vacuum. I think it essentially almost continues to this day, which is part of the issues and problems we have today in the Mideast. The one thing I can say for sure is that the U.S. consulate and embassy personnel, wherever we went, whether it was in Jeddah, whether it was in Ras Tanura, Saudi Arabia, or up in Kuwait, were extremely happy to have us there. They entertained us, and they personally told us that when we see that U.S. ship coming into the harbor with the U.S. flag flying, it just gives us a sense of security that we wouldn't have if you weren't there. Now, granted, we were only 2 destroyers covering thousands of miles, but it became pretty obvious that the flag was very, very important function. That was something I learned very early.
Well, you're sorry, Mike.
So during this time, Any of this stuff get back to the news back in the United States? Did the family know that you had this stuff going on?
Yes, the local newspapers, and I think probably my mother cut an article out that had a picture of our ship taking the hostages aboard, the rescued hostages aboard. But none of the articles went into any detail as to how they were freed, or any of the details that Rick, you've talked about in terms of the presence of the Soviet Union there, in terms of the Cuban mercenaries, as well as their support of the, I guess we'll call it early version jihadists that were involved, Arabic jihadists.
That's crazy.
Jack, this is Tim. I'm producing the show today. You can't see me on screen, but I'd be kind of interested. You were a junior officer in these days, correct?
Yes.
So you were stuck right in the middle between the command structure and passing those orders down to the sailors doing their job. What predicaments did you find yourself in during this time of trying to, do the right thing but yet follow orders? Did you have any issues along those lines?
Not really. As you say, what flows downhill.
We do.
Part of my job, I quickly learned as a junior officer, was to deflect a lot of the stuff that comes down. And I'm not going to say there was a lot of it, but anything that was that would, I think, negatively affect my guys, that was my job to absorb it. So as a junior officer, you're kind of they assume you don't know much of anything, but part of what you do learn is that you absorb and deflect the stuff that you don't want your guys to get beat up about. I just felt really lucky that I had a great department that I was in charge of. Most of these, I had sonarmen, fire controlmen, a torpedo man, and so I wound up actually having more responsibilities as an ensign than normal, because we were short officers, permanently short officers aboard ship. I had no chief petty officers. I didn't even have a chief petty officer. Pardon?
I'm sorry, please. You mentioned that you had about 250 sailors on board.
Yes.
That. How old were you at that time?
I think I was 22, 23.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
With all that kind of responsibility at that age.
Yeah. So I was fire control officer as well as the sonar / ASW officer. And so, anything that involved firing the guns, that was my responsibility. Anything that involved anti-submarine warfare, firing the torpedoes. In those days, we still had Hedgehogs. But, that was also my responsibility. So, you had to kind of grow up pretty fast. But I had a good bunch of guys. As I say, my senior petty officers were first class. Mostly, I was staffed with a lot of second class and third class, and quite a few, strikers. So it was interesting. But there was a good bunch of guys. They were great to be with.
So after that duty, I believe you mentioned that you guys moved on in the Mediterranean. I think you headed over toward Rome or something like that.
Yeah, we on that particular tour, we wound up as I said, we watched the British bring in their aircraft carriers, land Marines, stabilize the situation. Our part of our problem there was we were not allowed to buy meat from any shore establishment. We could buy fresh, we could buy eggs, we could buy lettuce, any of that sort of thing, flour, but we couldn't buy meat. So we basically would go up to Mombasa, be able to pick our goods up, or we picked some things up in Aden as well. But we couldn't get meat. So we were out there for a couple of months without any fresh meat, frozen meat, whatever. So we, spam. We had spam for breakfast, lunch, and spam. It was just wonderful.
So with the meat thing, is that like due to sanitary conditions or people possibly getting sick from it, or?
Yeah, it was. I think it was one of the conditions of our supply department was not, allowed to buy the meat in a foreign place. And it's probably because of things like trichinosis or whatever. It wasn't, you couldn't guarantee that it was properly prepared or refrigerated. So we just didn't take it aboard.
Right.
So
I remember. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, we wound up there quite a long time. We should have left a long time before that and gone back into the Mediterranean, but we were held up because of the problems. And ultimately we went back up to Aden, refueled, strangely at the same fueling pier where years later the USS Cole was blown up. It's hard to believe, but it's same exact place. So we went from there. We went back up through Suez. We then went to Beirut, Lebanon, for some resupply of all kinds of goods. And then we weren't sure whether we were going to go over to Cyprus, where there was a problem between Turkish and Greek Cypriots fighting with one another. There was a civil war going on Cyprus. Luckily, we didn't have to go there. And luckily, we were able to ultimately depart the Med and head back to the U.S. In March of that year. Later on, we went back to the Med a few months later and had a kind of interesting experience that time. We had a lot of crazy experiences, but one of them was one night we were off of Civitavecchia, which is the port of Rome. And we had refueled from the USS Kaskaskia. And the Kaskaskia had fallen astern of us. We were heading north, we were heading for La Spezia for a stop. And our after lookout saw an explosion on the horizon. Well, what the lookout had seen, which we immediately turned around and headed back toward where the explosion was seen. What had happened is the USS Kaskaskia was going to pass, bow to bow, a civilian freighter called, it was a Liberian freighter, as it turned out, the SS World Bond. It was an oiler, and somehow that ship turned in front of the USS Kaskaskia, and the Kaskaskia hit it amidships. So it was a collision at sea, which is amazing that could happen, but it happened. The Kaskaskia just had its bow bent at odd angles, but this Liberian tanker was just absolutely on fire. So we went into the scene to see what we could do. All of the crew aboard this ship had gotten off and were floating around in small boats. The ship was not manned; it was just on its own, just floating along, slightly dead in the water. And I say slightly because it was still moving. So we came up alongside its port side to our bow side. I was in charge of the forward hose crews. So we had all of our hoses out there. I knew absolutely nothing about what I was doing, but I was supposed to be in charge of it. All I know is that the fire control chief that we had there went down into the chief's quarters, and they came back with what they call suicide nozzles. We weren't allowed to have these aboard. We were only allowed to have the combo type of nozzles, which could be converted to spray or to long streams. But they didn't have any range because the long stream wasn't terribly long. But the chiefs kept these suicide nozzles, put them on the hoses, and the danger of them was that they were powerful enough that you had to have 3 or 4 or more men holding on to them because they could just throw you around because of the power of the stream. So we pulled up alongside this ship, and I swear that it was, and to this day I have problems with it. It was like going into hell. I mean, I have never seen fire like this in my life, and we were alongside of it. And what we didn't know is whether it was going to blow up on us or not, take us with it. So we're fighting the fire. We put water down on it. We tried to stay alongside as close as we could get. And ultimately it wasn't working too well. Meanwhile, we had gotten all of the folks from the ship aboard, so they were all safe. Nobody died from that on their side. So young Lieutenant John Eller aboard our ship, who was a DC officer, took a crew in the whaleboat along with some handy billy pumps, went aboard the World Bond. Coming up on its starboard side, they dragged all of their gear aboard along with hoses, and there was the ship itself didn't have enough hoses, didn't have even the ability to put out its own fire. It was amazing that kind of a ship could be at sea. Anyway, our guys got aboard. They then were able to put more water on the fire. We got the whole thing under control, saved the ship. Then we, got some of their people to volunteer to go back aboard it, and we went and escorted them into I think they went into Civitavecchia, and the ship was saved. So that was a lot of fun. I just remember all of us were pretty much covered in black soot. I mean, it was ground into us. It was the first time aboard ship I had any legal alcohol. The chief corpsman broke out medicinal alcohol, and we all got ourselves oiled pretty well. And it was
medicinal alcohol. What do you mean by that?
medicinal alcohol. Have no idea what it was. It was called medicinal
Cure
alcohol.
what ails you.
And it wasn't rubbing alcohol,
All right.
That's awesome.
So with
Dr.
doing
Jack
these
Daniels.
deployments like that, being in these quarters and living conditions, what was that like? Because I know from my experience, being in a room with 13 other Marines and all that stuff, after getting done with patrols and all, I can kind of get a little ripe with the conditions and smells and all that stuff. Was there like a sense of claustrophobia? Like, what did you do to keep your sanity and all that with the ships?
The crew's living quarters were not as cramped on a Sherman class as they had been on the older like Fletchers and Gearing and the other class destroyers. I had during my years at Marquette, we used to have to take summer cruises, and I had spent two different cruises at sea. One on a Fletcher class destroyer, where I lived and worked as a seaman / fireman for a summer, and so I knew what those conditions were like. And then later on, I was on another ship called the USS Ingraham, and it was a little bit improved over the Fletcher, but not much. But getting aboard a Sherman, there was a lot more space for the crew. It was livable. They, as I said, they did really well. They had peanut butter hidden wherever they could find a spot. They always found a place to keep some bread tucked up in the air conditioning ducts. So there was always extra food, maybe stolen cans of peaches and pears hidden here and there, all of which I just totally ignored as an officer. Officers' quarters were, I think, fairly decent. We had two men to a room, and it was pretty decent. So I thought that was fine, and I had some time. I lived down in Chief's quarters for a while. Matter of fact, I was the only one in Chief's quarters because we didn't have that many Chiefs aboard. And the only reason I was there is because I'd been banned from my stateroom by the XO. And the reason for that was...
And why were you banned from the stateroom?
Well, the captain had decided we needed new carpeting in the wardroom. So when they were taking the old carpeting out, I was able to scrounge a good chunk of it that was from under the wardroom table. So it was nice carpet. So I installed it in the stateroom I was in, which made it better than the linoleum. It was really pretty nice. And so I don't know, the XO saw that and he said, "Oh, we may have some guests aboard. therefore you're going down to chief's quarters. And so I wound up being all by myself down at chief's quarters for 6 months. Can you believe? I don't know what my men thought. I don't know why I was getting punished so badly, but
You were actually with a better group of people.
I think so.
I mean,
But
want anything done, get the Chiefs.
so, but the other
spoiling
interesting
you.
thing is the fellows, had. I was lucky some of them had guitars, and I thought, when we were in the med and every place, we used to refuel about every second or third day from either an oil or from an aircraft carrier. So I suggested, you're playing the guitar all the time down here, electric guitars. Why don't we put a little band together, and we'll go up on the 01 level, and they always would bring their band out on the carrier and play music for us. So why don't we just play music back at them? So we did. And I did actually get permission from the XO to do that, which usually didn't give me permission to do much of anything, but he did, and that was kind of cool. So that was another little thing that we would do.
What type of music would the bands play? Because I know heavy metal probably wasn't at the forefront at that time yet. So
this was at the time when you would have music like Caravan and Walk Don't Run and songs like that.
Yeah.
That was all guitar music, and that's what the guys were playing, and it was great to have them up there doing it while we're refueling and running the ship's high line, hauling in supplies and whatever, as well as our 3-day load of I'll call them shit kicker movies, which the CO liked. He wanted to see all these cowboy movies, so we always had a potload of those. And I don't really know about movies. Those things that come aboard, and I had responsibility for midships for taking this stuff aboard. So right away you take a look inside the cover to see what had been written in there, and there would be a code to tell you whether it was a good movie or bad movie. It would say like NFG, that meant a really bad movie, or if it said GFF, that was a good movie.
What do those acronyms stand for?
Well, G is good, and FF. I won't say the F part, but the next one is flick. They're called flicks. So GF flick.
Gotcha.
So that's the code.
Nice.
I love it.
So
I understood that you did some protectorate duty on Iceland. You protected them against Soviet invasion, Soviet incursion, and so on, and then later moved on to NATO.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about your career in those two areas?
Yes. Once I spent my first 2 years aboard destroyer. The second 2 years I was aboard the aircraft carrier, the USS Randolph, which was a CVS, an anti-submarine warfare carrier. And so I was ASW officer aboard the Randolph, which meant that in the Combat Information Center, I ran the show. By this time I'd become a lieutenant. Actually, I made full lieutenant, which was amazing, because I don't think my former XO would have wanted that, but the one on the destroyer. But in any case, I was able to, sort of run the show where we had our aircraft and our helicopters out, prosecuting submarine contacts. So that was interesting. So it got me into the naval air picture. So when I left active duty, I immediately became a naval reservist, and I joined the Naval Air Reserve. Thought I'd try that instead of being in the surface Navy. And the unit that I joined in Grosse Ile, Michigan, was attached to Commander Fleet Air Keflavik, Iceland. So I started going to Keflavik, and it was in the height of the conflict we were having, the quiet conflict with the Soviet Union, and they were spending a ton of money and a ton of operational time moving ballistic missile submarines into the North Atlantic, moving carrier busting submarines into appropriate positions, whether they were heading down into the Mediterranean to tail our carriers or wherever. So the job that we had in Iceland, we were sort of the cork in the bottle. And our job there was to always know where every Soviet submarine was at all times, and to be able to prosecute them if necessary. So it was a very intense situation. My reserve unit, when I was commanding officer of the unit, I'd have the phone call right from Keflavik and say, "We want your people here tomorrow." And we already would have orders pre-cut. We'd have airline tickets pre-cut so that we could send our folks there instantaneously. So we had some very interesting situations up there. One thing that we were always worried about was the security of Iceland itself. They had no forces to amount to anything of their own. So we had U.S. Marines there. We had Navy there. We had Air Force there to defend the island. And one time there was an earthquake in Peru, and the Soviets decided for the first time ever to send their aircraft with supplies supposedly to Peru to help them out. Well, these aircraft were going to fly into Iceland. We'd never had Soviet aircraft in Iceland before. They had to stop for refueling en route. And these were the big Soviet Antonov 12 and Antonov 22s, which are pretty darn big aircraft, especially the 22s. They were the largest aircraft in the world at the time. Well, our concern was, would the Soviets use this as an opportunity to take Iceland? I mean, would they pretend on the pretext that they were taking supplies to Peru, or would they actually land with forces and just take our island? So that was a scary period, very scary, especially watching the planes land and trying to see how when they hit the ground, whether the weight of the aircraft was reasonable, or would it be a weight that might indicate that they have mechanized vehicles aboard, because they could be carrying tanks and other weaponry. So we had the place quietly loaded with Marines, hidden here, there, and everywhere as these folks came in. And as it turned out, and I know personally because I went out on the tarmac, talked my way into taking a tour of one of the big AN-22s, and I went in aboard, and the stuff that they were carrying was indeed emergency supplies for the Peruvians. So that was okay. The only bad thing was that after that particular plane that I was aboard took off, it disappeared from everybody's radar, and the Russians admitted that it had disappeared. So the question was, why did it disappear, and who had been aboard it? Well, I had to go visit with the admiral because I had to be interrogated as to did I place anything aboard the aircraft that might have caused it to crash. So this was a little scary.
Because you got the tour.
Yeah. So the only thing I can say is that when that plane landed, they were having some engine troubles, and they didn't turn it off when they first parked on the tarmac. They were running their engines up and down. These are great big turboprop, counter-rotating turboprop engines. And that plane we, observed at the time before I ever went aboard it, said, they got some problems. Well, obviously they had really serious problems after it took off, and it did crash. So on the good side, we had a couple of aircraft the Air Force brought in from Germany to help search and rescue. Now, the Russians didn't cooperate with us on this because they don't cooperate. But so we sent our own planes out, C-130s, special C-130s to look. And I did volunteer to become a set of eyes. And I hung myself out in a bubble and went out and cruised up and down the fjords of Greenland, trying to find any sign of wreckage or other things. And we found absolutely nothing. And the Russians, I don't think, ever found anything. It was just gone. So, but
Well,
so
we got about 15 minutes left. What I'm wondering here, if you might be able to share with us your experiences. I guess you served time at NATO headquarters out of Brussels.
Yes, I did.
And you did a lot of great duty there. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
After I was in Iceland, I was in a group, a reserve group that was attached to the Supreme Allied Commander Atlantic, and we were attached to the Brussels, their political arm in Brussels. At that time, we had 15 members of NATO, and they all had ambassadors, and they all had senior military folks at the headquarters in Brussels.
So there were only 15 nations in NATO at that time.
Yeah, now we got 31, so it's grown.
That's crazy.
So what we did is we were attached to the I guess we'll call it the political arm, the SACLAN. We called it Supreme Allied Commander Atlantic's representative to Europe. So I wound up during the 8 years that I did this, I wound up working for a Dutch vice admiral. I worked for a Norwegian vice admiral and then a British vice admiral. And what we basically did is we worked with the ambassadors. We worked with the military representatives from the various countries, doing exercises to simulate various conditions that might occur with NATO's relationship with the Soviet Union. And it was quite exciting work, I'll tell you. But what was amazing about it is how well the NATO members got along with one another, how they got over all the various possible difficulties they have between each other as countries to come together for self-defense. It was amazing. And it was, and I got to say, it was in many ways very parliamentary, with a lot of respect, a lot of civility, and we got the job done. It was experience I would pay money to do.
So it sounds like we were learning how to get along, how to work together, how to function together as a united front against the Soviet incursion, if you will.
Absolutely. I think the most terrifying time I had there was we did do an exercise that is the unthinkable exercise where NATO in an exercise form needed to go nuclear to turn back an exercise format which showed that the Soviets were coming across the borders into Europe, into NATO Europe. And so I'm not watch on a second floor of almost like an office building in NATO headquarters, and we are doing all the targeting, nuclear targeting, and all of the commands of Europe as well as the U.S. are underground. They're all under bunkers. Everything's in the bunker, and I'm sitting there saying,
"Is that your phone?"
Yeah, that's it'll end. So where I'm sitting there and I'm saying, wait a minute, everybody's been extracted, everybody's underground except our staff here. We're in the situation center. We're dead. We're not going to make it.
You're expendable.
This is a one-way trip. Why did I sign up for this? And that was a bit scary. I said, this is, so how's it going to be? We're going to be gassed to death, missile strike. How are we going to go away here? Because we aren't going to make it. So that was enlightening.
Just trying to relate to that story a little bit. I was stationed in 1978, the 10th anniversary of Prague Spring in Prague, Czechoslovakia, at the American Embassy there as a Marine Guard. And every month for about 3 days, I took 3 trucks with Czech citizens on board. We went across the border into Germany, about 20 miles inland, into an American Army base, Grafenwehr. And it was a huge artillery training base. It was a I don't know, that's where Patton apparently stopped. Well, we loaded up our groceries and stuff, all our supplies, and we went back and we filled our stores and completed our orders. But on the way down there, going through Pilsen and driving through the countryside and going across the iron fence, the the barbed wire and everything else. I saw it all. That was really cool. I saw nothing but Soviet and Warsaw Pact military vehicles and equipment. And so I was taught, hey, take down some notes. And so I had a little recorder and I was just doing numbers and just reading out these numbers and everything else, giving it to our attaché people. So it was kind of like a small amount of intelligence. But when I got to Grafenwehr, I went to this army base and I'm looking at these army guys just walking around nonchalant. And I wondered, I even asked somebody, do you have any idea what's on the other side of that border, not more than 20 kilometers away? You know, there's like 9 divisions over there just poised to overrun this entire place, and they won't have any problems doing it. I think they could have done it, but how long they would keep it, I don't know. Because that was your job in NATO to, organize that side of it. But to see it from the other side, that was a pretty surreal experience.
Well, I think those days were extremely dangerous. And I was glad to have so many years working, in the U.S. Navy, especially for NATO, because that's kind of what it was all about, trying to win the Cold War and keep the Soviet Union from, expanding and making life difficult for ourselves and our allies. And frankly, when I retired in 1991, and right at the, I ended my career at the end of the Cold War. So I think we'd won it, and I got to feel real proud to be a part of it.
Well, you served during the height of it. I mean, from your time, you saw what they were doing in Africa and taking advantage and trying to make us weak. Right through the NATO side of it, the seat of cooperation and the deterrence that we were creating, and you just and watching the wall come down shortly after.
Yes,
wow.
And I think that, and it was especially fun during the part of some of the Reagan years when we had Bobby Inman as Secretary of the Navy. We really pushed it to the Soviets. We were able to sneak an aircraft carrier task group, all the way up to northern Norway, and all of a sudden they showed up off Murmansk, and the Russians didn't know they were there. So we did some real interesting stuff that just pushed the edges of what you can get away with without starting war.
Yeah, some of that stuff that you brought up with war, there was a movie back in the early 80s. I think it was a TV movie book called The Day After, The Morning After, where in the movie it shows, Russia and America, they're having turmoil, all that stuff, and then all of a sudden, like halfway through the movie, it shows, us and Russia going through nuclear war and all that. So you see the missiles flying off and all that. And it was pretty creepy, actually, for a TV movie. Actually made pretty well, but I remember like John Lithgow was in it, a couple other famous actors. But I thought some of the build up prior to them and us launching the missiles and all that stuff was just like, wow, that's pretty scary and giving anxiety, because it was shot very well. So
So Skipper, being retired since 91, 32 years, you used to hang out with other veterans on a regular basis and kind of, mentor them getting through the life after the Navy?
Yeah, we do. And that's, it's kind of interesting. Not only do I, get to see many of the fellows that I serve with, we get together, for from time to time, but most of my friends are vets. It's strange. And back, when Hurricane Katrina hit our southern coast, a group of us got together and started going down and doing habitat rebuilds down there. Well, the group is still together doing rebuilds, and it was interesting. Maybe it was the second time we were down there. we all of a sudden realized that, oh, we're all veterans. You know, some were Army, some were Air Force. I was Navy, but we're all veterans, and we're all here doing this stuff. And I said, this is kind of strange, you know, that, you know, of all of us 8, 9, 10 guys, we're all vets. And, you know, I guess it's just the fact that we can, as vets, we kind of feel like we can go do anything, anytime, any place. You can't throw anything at us that's going to scare us, or that we're going to feel like the place we have to live is beneath us, or we can't handle it. And yeah, so it's funny what having been in the service gives you, you know, that you really don't know it's there, but doing something like the habitat thing brings it out, you know.
That's fantastic.
Well, Skipper, we really appreciate you spending some time with us today and sharing your part of history that most Americans will never know about. Really enlightening, and hopefully our viewers will see the same.
Well, this is what we're trying to accomplish here with Roger Dat Chronicles, is to share this type of experience. I mean, your experience was pretty phenomenal, covering across a broad range of our American history during my lifetime. And to have this shared with us as you did was really totally appreciated.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. One thing I have to say that we didn't talk about is the place of your loved ones, especially wives and your children. The service that you do takes a real toll on them. They serve who also sit and wait. Okay.
Right.
And so my wife had to put up with an awful lot for many years, as did my children. And I know that it wasn't always easy for them when I was gone. But they're part of the backbone of us being able to do what we do as vets.
That's incredible. Great comment. Look, for our viewers, we want to thank everybody for being here, and very important, if you can, go back and take a look at our previous podcasts where we talked to Tim Stewart about the significance of Flag Day, where we spoke with Kirk Morris about Gold Star, being a Gold Star member of Gold Star family, and so on. Next episode is going to be on July the 6th, involving Chicago Police Marines, and he's a police officer, Paul Zog. He's going to be talking about Chicago fishing for vets. Matter of fact, they have an event coming up. I think it's this week, is it?
A week from today.
A week from today, next Thursday.
Is that take a vet fishing?
It's what they do is
they have their own.
Go ahead.
They have their own group where they can pull any vets that are around, plus all the Chicago Police Marines. Right. They'll come up to the Chain of Lakes area every year, and they get boats for them and get out fishing. And then they do a barbecue, drink beer, and stuff like that.
Oh,
they're not linked to the Take a Vet fishing group.
You had me at drink beer. We'll be there.
Okay.
That's pretty amazing. After that, we're going to have Master Sergeant Jeff Bruce, United States former Marine, he's going to tell us about his military experience in serving our government and representing our government with the King's Palace in Saudi Arabia. On August the 3rd, we've got Ray Ivey, U.S. Army veteran, Vietnam veteran from Missouri. He's going to be talking to us about the difficulties in veterans group being able to recruit. So we'll be talking about that sort of thing. August the 17th.
You don't want to miss this one, folks.
Joe Phelan. Joe Phelan is United States Air Force Vietnam veteran who flew 285 missions, wow, rescue missions in Vietnam. And he's got quite the story to tell. And September 7th, we have one of our favorites, Joy Avang, a wife of a deceased Marine, Irving,
and he was a Iwo Jima vet.
Yes, Iwo Jima veteran. Thank you, sir. And she accumulated hundreds of stories from veterans throughout McHenry County area, northwestern, northeastern side of Illinois, and accumulated their stories, veteran stories. Very interesting. Purple Heart earners, Medal of Honor earners, and so forth. And she compiled 3 books. And so we're going to be talking about that. So having said that, once again, please thank you to Captain Jack Crusoe, United States Navy retired, for being our special guest today. It was fantastic having you here. And we're honored. We're honored by your presence.
And as always, if you like what you hear, follow us on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Apple, Spotify, also YouTube. Hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification for future videos. And hit the like button as well, too.